everybody. Again, my name is Becky Baugh. I'm a naturalist at the Wapsie River Environmental Education Center in Dixon, Iowa, part of Scott County Conservation Board. And today we are going to be learning about winter wild edibles. So I am going to go to the next slide. You'll see what we'll be learning about today. There we go. So I will go through some foraging basics, foraging safety, plant identification, some basic rules of conservation when foraging, and then I'm going to cover 5 winter wild edibles. So like I said earlier, I do them every season, but I don't want to overwhelm people with many wild edibles. There's a lot out there. So I try to only stick to 5 during each of my presentations, so it's not so overwhelming. In the winter, there really isn't a lot of wild edibles out there compared to other seasons, but there is enough where I can do presentations in the winter just like I can any other season. So with some basics, always bring an ID guide for reference. So it can be a pocket guide, it can be a field guide, it can be your own smartphone. It can be any of those things. So when you bring an ID guide, make sure, especially if you're using a smartphone and you're using the internet to look up things, make sure you use reputable sources. Don't go to Wikipedia, stick with one source, make sure it checks the boxes and you're good. You wanna kind of compare with everything. On your proper collecting tools. Now, depending on what you wanna collect, it is always smart to know what you wanna collect before you go out into the field to collect those wild edibles. So you want to bring along a gathering basket or a Ziploc bag or a shallow tray or a burlap sack. It all kind of depends on what you are wanting to harvest. Burlap sacks are the best for mushrooms, which with this being a winter wild edible, there are not winter mushrooms for you to gather, so I won't cover too much on those mushrooms. You'll also want to bring around some pruning shears, a small trowel, loppers, gloves. Those are all really good things to bring when you are out foraging. Again, it all depends on what you want to harvest. Not everything you'll need a small trowel for, as you will not be digging up the whole plant, but some plants you do want that root, and so you would bring that small trowel. The book I have in the picture here is A Scout's Guide to Wild Edibles. That one was actually written by an Iowa naturalist. His name is Mike Kriebel. He has a second book coming out soon, I believe, but this one is a really good book because it only covers 30 to 40 wild edibles found right here in this area, but it also has recipes in this book. And a lot of the other wild edible books will kind of explain how to prepare them, but they won't have like a detailed recipe. So this is a very good book, and it is pocket size. It is a smaller book, so it is one that you can actually carry in your pocket as you are out in the field. Another basics is dress for success. Know where you are going to go. Are you harvesting water plants? Are you harvesting prairie plants? Are you harvesting woodland plants? It's always good to dress for success. If you are planting, or if you are harvesting, if you know you're going to harvest something with a lot of thorns on it, like for instance raspberries, those bushes are very thorny. So maybe wear long sleeves so you don't get scratched up when harvesting those raspberries. So definitely dress for success. Also know the plants you are wanting to harvest along with those plants that you are wanting to avoid. So in the winter, there isn't that many plants to avoid. Other seasons, there are a few plants you do want to avoid. But in the winter, the only plant you really want to avoid is poison ivy. That you can get a reaction from poison ivy if it is in the middle of summer or if it is in the dead of winter. You can still get a poison ivy reaction from poison ivy or from in the winter. So as you can see with these pictures, I have some of the spring and summer pictures of poison ivy. It is the common leaves of 3, let it be. Now that's not always the case. There are some plants out there that have 3 leaves that you can touch and you'll be just fine. But with poison ivy, a great way to identify it, especially in the spring and fall, is it has that red tint of leaves to it. So the picture in the top right has this red shiny-ish leaf to it. That red tint, that is a brand new leaf. In the summer, you can see in the middle top picture, that is a summer leaf. So it loses that red tint. But in the fall, the whole entire leaf turns bright red. So those are really easy ways to tell them spring, summer, fall. But winter, even though there's no plants ivy, you can still get that reaction. And the easiest way to tell poison ivy from anything is the vine. So if you look at the plant or the picture all the way over on the left, it is a very, very hairy vine. So with that hairy vine, that is poison ivy. It does a really good job of blending in with the trunk. As you can see in the middle picture on the bottom, that is also that very hairy vine, and it blends in with the bark really well. Some people confuse it with Virginia creeper. Easiest way to tell those two vines apart is the poison ivy vine is hairy, as you can see in those pictures. The Virginia creeper vine has more, I almost want to say gecko feet. So it has like this little vine, it has these three little fingers coming off of it, and it kind of like suctions to the tree. Now it's not an actual suction cup, but that's kind of what it looks like. It kind of looks like a little gecko feet or little frog feet as it is attaching to the tree, whereas poison ivy is a very hairy vine. And like I said, if you brush up against that in 16-degree weather like it is out today, you can still get that poison ivy reaction. So also, like I said earlier, know the plants you want to harvest. So you kind of have an idea, study up on that plant, know exactly what it is that you want to go out into the field and collect. So you have an idea of where you're going to go and what you are collecting. So some foraging safety. You never want to eat any part of a plant unless you are 100% positive of that plant's identification. If you look at a plant and you're just not quite sure what it is, or you think it matches all of the, you can check all the boxes on it, but some of them don't really check those boxes and you're just not sure, don't eat it. You are not ready to eat it unless you can go up and be like, yes, that is a mulberry tree. Yes, that is a mulberry. I can eat that mulberry. So make sure you are 100% positive of that plant's identification, because there are a lot of plants out there that have lookalikes, and the lookalikes are toxic. Whereas the plant you're wanting to collect may not be. It may be perfectly edible. So make sure you are 100% positive of that plant's identification. Be certain that the part you intend to eat is edible in the condition and the season in which you harvested it. So there are some plants, like for instance, pokeweed. Pokeweed is unfortunately, it's not a good weed to have around. In the spring, it is edible. In the fall, it is super toxic. However, in the fall, it is really easy to identify, and in the spring, not so much. So make sure you understand that plant very well. If you can identify it in the fall, definitely don't collect it in the fall as it is toxic, but put a flag in the ground, see where it's at, note where this location is, so come spring, when it is edible, you are able to find it. Avoid collecting plants from well-traveled roads, railroad tracks, recently sprayed agriculture fields, ball diamonds, golf courses, other polluted sites, just because a lot of those will contain contaminants that are not edible. So especially with railroad tracks, there's a lot of arsenic on railroad tracks. That is definitely toxic. Don't go for those. Also, if you are collecting water plants, know the water source. As water plants collect everything through their roots, and if there is toxins in the water, that plant will have toxins in it. So I know, for instance, one plant that is edible that a lot of people don't realize, and most people consider it a weed, is dandelion. Dandelion is a edible plant, and the entire thing is edible. You can eat the flower, you can eat the stem, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the root. The entire plant is edible. And I had a friend one time that I was telling him this plant is edible, dandelion's edible, and he's like, oh, I tried it when I was young and I got really, really sick. And I was like, oh, well, where did you collect it from? And he's like, oh, the local park at the Ball Diamond. And I'm like, well, most likely it was sprayed with Roundup. So it was, just make sure you know where you are collecting, make sure they don't use pesticides, herbicides, any of that in that area when you are collecting. Make sure if it is on private property, you get permission. So just try to avoid those well-traveled roads and those places that may be contaminated with pesticides and herbicides. Follow the wild edible plants throughout all the seasons. So you know, like I said with the pokeweed, you know what it looks like in the fall. You don't know what it looks like in the spring. You can't eat it in the fall. So make sure you follow the plant through all 4 seasons to know exactly what it looks like during all 4 seasons, and know where you are collecting from. Like I said earlier, also if you're foraging wild water plants, for instance, cattail is an edible plant. Know the water source. If there is some contaminants being drained into the water source where those cattails are, those cattails will absorb those contaminants into the plant itself and will therefore be not safe to eat. Only collect plants that appear to be healthy. If they are on their way out, looks like they're dying or they may have been sprayed with something, do not collect those plants. And of course, if you are on private property, make sure you get permission to forage first. Now, also make sure when you are foraging, let's say you really like foraging in this area and you know all the land, you know where you can go, you know what, where it is permitted and where it is not. And let's say you go on a family vacation to another state and it is allowed for foraging in another state in the certain area where you want to forage, make sure that plant is not protected in that state. In some states, the plant may be common here in Iowa and it may be an endangered species in another state and therefore protected. So make sure you do your research if you are traveling to another area to make sure that plant isn't protected in other states. Because that is a federal offense if you collect an endangered species from the wild. Plant identification. So I always try to stick to 5 steps in identifying a wild edible plant. My first step is a tentative identification. So I've located what I'm pretty sure is that plant that I want to forage or harvest. Then compare your plant to reliable references. So, and do this carefully, thoroughly, critically. Make sure you check all the boxes. Don't just say, oh, those leaves look the same, we're good. Because maybe the stem is square and not round. Maybe the leaves may look the same, but they're in a different arrangement. So make sure you check all of the boxes. And I'll get to how leaves are arranged soon. But also double and triple check. So compare several more reliable references. So if it checks a box on one reference, make sure check another reference. Make sure they all look like it is the exact plant that you want to harvest. Find more specimens. So they may be in different growing stages. It may be spring, but some came up earlier than others. So they may all be in different growing stages, even in the same season. So find more specimens, do this until you can effortlessly recognize that plant. You don't need that ID guide anymore to recognize this plant. You know exactly what it is. And then finally, assess contradictory confidence. Basically be your devil's advocate. So do you really have what you wanted to collect? Are you absolutely positive that is what you wanted to collect? Will you get sick if you eat this plant? If you can answer, nope, I'm not going to get sick. I know this plant is edible. It is good to go. Then you're ready to collect that plant. If you still need a book to identify a wild edible or a website or any of that, you are not ready to collect that plant. Because like I said earlier, there are some lookalikes to the edibles that are very toxic. All right, so plant ID, like I said, leaf arrangement, stem size, stem shape. So those are all parts where you can identify a plant. So here are some black and white pictures just to kind of show you an easy way to identify. So we have simple. Simple is in the bottom left. So that is just one leaf coming off of a node. So a node is where the leaf attaches to the stem of the plant. So we have simple, then we have alternate. So alternate is in the bottom right. So with the alternate, it's one simple leaf coming off of the stem at each node, but they're in alternate arrangement. So it comes from the left side of the stem, then the right side of the stem, then the left side of the stem, and it ladders its way up the stem. So that is your alternate arrangement. Then you have opposite arrangement. So opposite is when you have 2 leaves coming off of the same node and they're coming out of opposite directions from that stem. So they also kind of look like a ladder, but instead of it being like a stair-step ladder, it is an actual ladder going up the stem. So that's your opposite. Sometimes with the opposite, they have them straight across and then the next set of leaves above are turned about 90 degrees and then those 2 come out of the stem, then turn back 90 degrees and they work their way up the plant that way. Then we have compound. So as you can see with the compound picture in the top right, that is a compound alternate. So it is alternately arranged where a leaf is coming off of a node and it is working on the right side, then the left side, then the right side, then the left side going up the stem. But the compound leaf, so it looks like there's a lot of leaves, but that is technically one leaf with several leaflets. So that is a compound leaf. And then finally in the bottom center, that is a basal rosette. So those are mainly in the ground. So for instance, your dandelion is where all the leaves come out of the same point in the ground and kind of circle outward. So your dandelions, your violets, wild violets, those are two very common basil rosettes. So of course, everything is easy to see in black and white, but as we all know, our world is not black and white. It is very colorful. So here are those same leaf arrangements in color. So it is not always easy to tell as it is in black and white. So we have compound leafing. So that's with a very common tree of compound leafing is black locust. Another common tree is your black walnut. So walnuts are also a compound leafing. So the leafing is kind of highlighted in this picture. So you can see where the lighter green is a whole bunch of little tiny leaflets, but it's coming off as one leaf. So that is your compound leafing. Alternate leafing, a common plant is Solomon seal. So as you look at Solomon seal, you can see starting at the left bottom of the leaf, there's a simple leaf. Then you go to the right side of the stem, left side of the stem, and it works its way up. So that is your alternate leafing. Opposite leafing, a very common plant is stinging nettle. Stinging nettle is one of those plants, unless you are wanting to harvest it, it is one of those that you want to avoid. Stinging nettle is edible. A lot of people don't realize that, but it has the same, very similar, I shouldn't say same, it is very similar nutrition as spinach. So it is a very healthy plant to eat, but know that stinging nettle gets its name because it has a stinging property to it. There are these little hairs all over the stem of the plant, and if you break those little hairs or little needles, it shoots an acid basically. It's not a terrible acid, but it shoots an acid into your skin and it causes a burning rash. Now this rash usually only lasts for a couple hours, but it is a very irritating rash. So if the stinging nettle is one you want to harvest to eat, that's where you'll want to wear gloves and long sleeves. So with this one, this is an opposite leafing. So you can see on this plant, it's kind of easy to see. It has the two leaves coming off the same node, and then you go up the stem and rotate 90 degrees, and then there's two more leaves coming out, and then you go up the plant and rotate 90 degrees back the other way, and you can see it kind of rotates as it goes up the stem, but it's always two leaves coming off the same node. So that is your opposite leafing. Your circular basil rosette. So like I said earlier, common one is dandelion. Most people around here should know what dandelion looks like, as it is considered a weed in some places, but in my opinion, it's a pretty little flower. So this is your dandelion. All the leaves come out of the same point in the ground and circle outward. And then we have cleavers or bed straw, which is your world leafing. So another common world leaf plant is Joe Pye weed. So it's where more than 3 leaves come out of the same node, and it kind of is in a circular pattern around the stem in that node. So with cleavers and bed straw, you can see there's 7 or 8 leaves coming off the same node, and you shoot up the stem and there's 7 or 8 more leaves coming out of the same node. With Joe Pye weed, it's typically 4, sometimes 5, and they're much bigger leaves as it is a much bigger plant. So those are your leafing arrangements. So then there is basic rules of conservation. So never ever take more than the remaining population can easily replace, which is about 10% of that plant's population. If you take more than that and the plant can't replace that the following season, eventually you're going to just eliminate that plant from the landscape. So you want to make sure when you are harvesting, you only take enough for you, you don't take a lot, so that way the plant can repopulate itself the following season. Always harvest in a way that does the least damage to the plant and its surroundings. So don't go tromping through the forest and stepping on a bunch of plants as you're trying to reach the one you want to collect. Make sure you kind of go through, there's a whole leave no trace. Make sure you are going through the forest in a way that does the least damage to the surroundings. Be aware of the invasive species in the area. So one common invasive species is garlic mustard. A lot of people have heard of this plant. A lot of people may know what this plant is. A lot of people don't realize it is edible and very delicious. So with garlic mustard, it is an invasive species. So if you find an invasive species, like for instance garlic mustard, ignore that first rule. Make sure you take 100% of the plant's population. Do not leave any behind, because that plant will spread like wildfire. It goes like crazy, and it will totally eliminate all the native plants in its area if it gets a chance. So if you see an invasive species, take 100% of the plant's population. If it is a native species, only take 10%. So with garlic mustard, fun fact about that one, how it outcompetes its other native plants is it sends out these allelopathic chemicals through the ground, through the roots. And basically what those chemicals do is it stops the germination of the native plants in the area. It is also one of the first ones to come up out of the ground, and it is a very quick growing plant, so it'll overshade all of those native species, and that is how it takes over an entire ecosystem. So with those plants, like I said, garlic mustard, it makes a wonderful French onion dip with cream cheese. So know that when you are collecting, but it is one of those plants that you want to take it all. But I'll move on to other basic rules. Know if the species you are intending to collect is protected in the area where you are collecting it. So like I said earlier, if you are collecting in this area and it's a common plant and it is safe to collect, great. Make sure if you go to a different area, if it is protected or not, before you go collecting it. Only collect the part of the plant that you plan to use, which try to harvest no more than 25% of that specific plant, of that one plant. If you are planning on using the whole thing, like for instance, I'll go back to dandelion. You can make these really good deep fried fritters out of the blossom of the dandelion. You can make like a spaghetti like noodle out of the stem of the dandelion. You can make a lovely green salad out of the leaves. You can roast the root and make a coffee out of the dandelion. So if you plan to do all four things with the dandelion, great, hold the whole plant. But if you're only planning on making a salad tonight, then only take the leaves. Or if you're only planning on making you can even make jelly out of the flower. If you're only planning on making jelly, then just take the flower. I know dandelion is a hard one because a lot of people consider it a weed. I consider it a flower. It's great for those bumblebees early in the spring. But I just use that one as an example because it's the easiest one to demonstrate with all parts being edible. And finally, try to cultivate wild edibles in your own garden. So the picture I have below is just one I found on Google, but what they're calling it is edible landscaping. So if you look up edible landscaping, you will find all these different ways where you can design your backyard to look beautiful and everything in it is edible. So this is a way that we can cultivate those wild edibles so you don't have to go to parks and collect them from the wild. You can just grow them in your own backyard. With that being said, do not plant garlic mustard, as delicious as it may be, it will spread. So please do not plant invasive species in your landscaping. All right, so I'm going to keep moving on. Oh, I did forget to mention, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat box and I will be sure to answer them at the end of this talk. But I'm going to move on to those 5 wild edibles that we will be discussing for winter wild edibles. So with this first one, it is the pecan. Now, right now, the pecan tree is dormant, but there may still be some of these nuts on the ground under the tree. This is one you can collect in the fall, and the pecans will definitely still be edible in the winter. So with pecan, the only edible part of this tree is the nut itself. It is a very tall tree. It can reach anywhere from 70 to 100 feet tall. The leaves are alternate, pinnately compound, and about 18 inches long. So when I say alternate, as we know, one leaf per node, and they are on opposite sides of the branch going up the branch. And then pinnately compound means there is more than one leaf. So with a pecan, there is typically, I believe, 9 to 17 leaflets per leaf. So it is a very long leaf. It kind of looks similar to your black walnut when you're looking at the leaves, not identical, but similar. And the leaflets are slightly toothed, so they have kind of a serrated edge to those leaves. The trees, this is one of those trees that you need to plant them in multiples to ensure pollination. So if you only plant one pecan tree in your yard, you probably won't get any fruits or nuts from it. You need to plant at least 2 so they can cross-pollinate with each other. There are other trees out there that you need to do that with, like for instance, your pawpaw is another one you need to have more than one. But pecan is one of those where you need to have more than one tree if you want those fruits, or the nut in this case. When you have a pecan tree, know that you are going to be in competition because our lovely little wildlife critters love pecans as well. So you will be in competition with those squirrels and the deer and raccoons, and blue jays will love them. Wood ducks, wild turkeys, foxes, all of those will eat pecans. Now pecans, they are more in the hardiness zone of 6 to 9. Now we here in Iowa are in about 5A, 5B. We're in 5. So this is more of a southern tree. However, it does grow along a riverway. So we do have them naturally growing here in our area by the river. So they're more of like near the Mississippi River is where you'll see them in the riparian area. It does take a while if you do want to plant one of these trees in your backyard. It takes about 6 to 10 years for these trees to start producing those nuts. So be patient when you plant one of these trees. Don't expect nuts in the next couple of years. It's going to take about 6 to 10 years before you're starting to see these nuts. The nuts themselves, they have 4 angled husks around the shell. Kind of looks like the football-ish, except it has some more sharper edges to it than a football does. But it is very similar to that. They are usually in clusters of 3 to 6. The husks will turn from a yellow-green to a brown when they are ripe, and that's around the time you'll start seeing them fall from the tree. And that's usually in September or October. The shell itself of the nut is 1.5 to 2 inches long. It is a very hard, oblong, and light brown to reddish brown. It has a pointed tip and a rounded base, and that pointed tip is a very sharp point. So that is an easy way to help you identify it. And the nut meat is very sweet. It tastes like the pecans you can buy at the grocery store. It's very sweet. They are an excellent source of antioxidants, protein, unsaturated fats, and more. And you can eat them raw right out of the shell. You can also bake them into breads, muffins, cookies, cakes, any of that. But you do want to make sure you fully remove the nut meat from the shell. That shell is very hard. If you have a piece of shell on that nut meat, you could possibly crack a tooth on it. It is a very hard shell. So make sure you have that nut meat fully removed from that shell before you go eating those pecans. And here are some pictures of it. I always like to have the kind of drawing of it so you can really see what it looks like. So you can see that football-sized husk, or not sized, shaped husk. And then you can see the little nut, the shell of the nut below that on the very bottom picture. And then you can see that the leaf has 9 to 17, depending. This one doesn't have quite 17, but this one does have many leaflets per leaf. And it does have that sawtooth edge to that leaf. So a real, like a picture not drawn, so a real picture. On the left, that is a very good picture of those pecan husks. That is when they are not quite ripe. So this is probably middle of summer in this picture. So you'll want to wait until that husk turns brown before you start collecting them. And then you can see with the other pictures, it can be a tall tree. And you can see how green those leaves are in the summertime with that ripe picture. All right, on to black walnuts. So the only, again, just like the pecan, the only edible part of this tree is the nut. It is also, again, a very tall tree. It can grow anywhere between 80 and 100 feet tall. Some species can even be upwards of 150. And they are typically only 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So they're a very narrow trunked tree, but they're very tall. The bark is a grayish black. It is deeply furrowed on the older trees. The leaves, again, just like the pecan, are alternate and pinnately compound, but they have 21 stemless, oval, smooth leaflets. So just a few more than the pecan, but if you're looking at the arrangement of the leaf, it is very similar to that pecan with the alternate arrangement and the pinnately compound leaf. The fruit of the tree ripens in the early fall. It is about 1.5 to 3 inches in diameter. It always starts out green, and then it'll turn brown, just like the pecan. And that's usually when it hits the ground. And then finally, that husk will turn black and mushy. Now with black walnuts, please know if you are trying to get that nut meat from the inner shell, that husk will dye your skin and pretty much anything else it touches. So make sure when you are harvesting the black walnut, if it still has that husk on the shell, if it has not rotted away from the shell of the nut, make sure you are wearing gloves and you are wearing either clothes you don't really care about, or you're wearing longer gloves, because you can get your clothes dyed from that, the husk oils of the black walnut. Also, make sure you fully remove that husk from the shell, and again, fully remove the shell from the nut meat, as that shell is very, very hard, harder than the pecan. There is always competition for wildlife, just like the pecan again. I know our lovely little squirrels love them. And you'll often see those shells have holes in them because they have those rodent-like teeth, and they will be chewing at that very hard shell to get to that nut meat. So that is usually the wildlife that we'll see chewing on them the most, but other wildlife do love those walnuts. They are very healthy for you. 1 ounce of black walnuts will contain 6 to 8 grams of protein, 16.8 grams of fat, 175 calories, 2.7 grams of carbs. They are also rich in potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium. So they are a very healthy nut for you. You can eat the nuts raw, just like I said. Make sure you fully remove them from the shell. You don't have any bits of that shell left, but you can eat them raw right out of that shell. You can also cook them in the baked goods, similar to the pecan, into muffins and cakes and cookies. You can also add them to ice cream and make a walnut-based ice cream. I've had that. It's very delicious. You can preserve the nuts. They can be stored at room temperature for 2 years if they are huskless but unshelled and unshelled. You can also extract the nut meats and keep them frozen in a vacuum sealed bag for up to 3 years in your freezer. So you can see in the picture on the bottom, that nut is not quite ripe. It's one still in the tree. You usually can collect them off the ground just easily, but they are a little smaller than a baseball, but bigger than a golf ball. So that is their approximate size with the husk. The nut, or the shell itself, is similar in size to a golf ball. So one thing with black walnuts, do know if you don't have one in your yard yet and you want to plant them, as you can see the picture in the top left, you will be dealing with that in the fall when you are mowing. They like to shed all their nuts around the same time, and they will scatter the ground. So just know, if you do want to have this as a wild edible in your backyard, you will be dealing with the nuts that aren't always great to go over with your mower. You can see they're a very tall tree, as you can see in the bottom right picture, looking up into the tree. You can also kind of see those compound leaves by looking up into the sky on that picture. The drawn picture, of course, shows that it has those many leaflets, and it has the husk nuts on the leaflet itself, or on the leaf itself. And then you have the nut right next to it. And then in the top right picture, you can see the size comparison of the nut with the husk. Then that brown fuzzy thing, that's actually the husk that is starting to rot before it gets to the shell. And then you have the shell itself, which has a lot of ridges in the nut shell. All right, ginkgo. A lot of people don't realize this tree, or the nuts of this tree, are edible because it has such an awful smell to that. So I will clue you in. They are edible, but they are very smelly, so know what you are getting into. I should say the husk of the nut is very smelly. The nut itself actually tastes pretty good. So the edible part of this tree are the leaves and the nuts. Now this tree isn't really considered a native. This one isn't ornamental, but it isn't I wouldn't consider it an invasive species either. It is an ornamental that is just a non-native. So with this plant, the leaves and the nuts are edible. The leaves are only edible in the fall. Do not try to collect them in the summer. The ginkgos will grow between 30 and 60 feet tall. They can grow up to 100 feet tall, but that is rare. They're usually the medium-sized tree, the 30 to 60. And they have that very common fan-shaped leaf. They're very easy to identify because of their leaf. They are fan-shaped, the pinnately veined leaves, so which means the leaves I don't know if you can see my camera. I'm going to hold my hand up. So the veins come from like the base where my wrist is, and they go out towards the fingers, so towards the edge of the leaf. So it's a palm-based veining to the leaves. The bark is gray and becomes cracked and furrowed in the older trees. Like I said, the leaves are fan-shaped, they're lobed, they're deeply veined. In the summer, they are a Kelly green, and in the fall, they are a golden yellow. And the fruit is produced only by the female tree. So if this is an ornamental tree that you want on your property, but you don't want the fruit, you don't want the edible part of it, if you are able to know the difference between the male and the female, your local horticulturist may know that for you. I would plant a male tree in your backyard so you don't deal with the fruit. If you do want the fruit, because it is an edible, then you'll be planting the female tree in your yard. And the female tree will only produce that fruit if the male tree is nearby. Now, like I said earlier, that fruit is putrid smelling. It is an awful smell. I didn't even know about this tree until I found it planted on a college campus, which these are very common trees on a lot of college campuses. That fruit itself, as you can see in the top picture, it is like a peach colored tree. They are not the size of peaches, they are much smaller, but they are a peach colored fruit. Now, ginkgos are actually considered a living fossil, and it is because they are the longest living tree in the world, and they are thought to be even from the Jurassic period. So with these trees, they are a very old, ancient tree, and like I said, they came from Japan, but they are considered a non-native. They're not considered an invasive, they're just a non-native. The ginkgo tree prefers rich, well-drained soil. It is drought tolerant, and it thrives in a variety of growing conditions, including your polluted urban environments, which, like I said, a lot of college campuses can be right in the middle of cities, and ginkgos do very well on those college campuses. The leaves and the nuts can be gathered in the fall. So like I said, with those leaves, do not collect them when they are that Kelly green color. You only want to collect them when they are that golden yellow. That is when they are edible. And always gather the fruits off the ground. Don't just pluck them from the tree, because that means they're not ripe yet. You want to collect them from the ground. When you are handling those fruits, I definitely recommend wearing gloves for many reasons. One of them is the smell alone. You will have that smell on your hand, and it is very hard to wash that smell away. But other reasons why you want to wear those gloves is the compounds in the ripe fruit can actually irritate sensitive skin and a rash. So you do definitely want to wear gloves when picking up these fruits off the ground. The nuts are very healthy for you. They do contain a mineral combination of phosphorus, potassium, copper, thiamine, and niacin. Always, 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 I cannot stress that enough, always cook this nut before eating. You cannot eat this nut raw. You can roast them, you can toast them, you can boil them. And that will improve the digestibility of these. And they do have a very unique flavor. When you're thinking nuts, you would think like a sometimes sweet, sometimes salty flavor. They have the flavor of a ripe cheese. So they're very unique. With these, so it is recommended to eat these in very limited quantities. Adults shouldn't eat more than 15 to 20 of them a day. Children 14 years and under shouldn't eat any more than 7 a day. They can have negative side effects in certain people. So just like any new food that you are trying, any wild edible, any new thing that you are wanting to try, don't just go and eat an entire meal of this. Try to eat it in small quantities first, see how your body reacts. If it reacts fine, then sure, eat more. But make sure you always start in small quantities. The leaf, they are often used in traditional herbal medicines in Asia. It is very popular. The leaf itself is very popular as a tea. That's usually how the tea is prepared. They'll collect the golden leaves and you can make a tea out of them, and it's a very nutritious. So here are some pictures of the ginkgo. So there is that Kelly green picture that really shows the fan-shaped leaf of the ginkgo, and that is in the upper right. But of course, you don't want to collect it when it is that color. You want to wait for it to be that golden color. So you can see in the bottom right, that beautiful golden color in the fall. That is when you can be collecting this leaf. And then you can see on the picture on the left, the 4 different stages of the nut as you are preparing it. So when you harvest it, it has, like I said, that peach wrinkly skin color to the skin. And they're, like I said, they are smaller than the peach, a peach, but that is their color. And this is something I do recommend if you have an outdoor shed, or even if you don't, try to process these outside. You can, once you get all of the nut meat, or not the nut meat, once you get all of the husk off of the shell itself, they're fine to bring in the house. They won't smell anymore. But that husky flesh on the outside of the shell is very smelly process. I recommend doing it outside. So then you can see for number 2, you can remove the fruit to get to the nuts. So the nut kind of looks like a pistachio almost. It doesn't have that crack of the pistachio yet, but it does have that shape of a pistachio. When you roast them, it is definitely recommended if you roast them in a pan on your stove top to put a lid on it, because as you're roasting them, of course, they heat up, and inside the shell there is a little bit of moisture with that nut meat, and they will start to pop when they are done. And they can pop right off of that pan. So make sure you put a lid on the pan when you are processing or you are roasting these ginkgos. And then as you can see, the ginkgo nut meat itself, the thing that you will eat, is this almost lime green color when it is fully ready to eat, when it is roasted. So it turns into this like pretty much a lime green, or that Kelly green color of the leaf. That's the color that you will see after you are done roasting. And that is when you can eat them. All right, on to the next one, Eastern white pine. So the Eastern white pine, the edible part of this tree are the needles. The tree can, this is a very, very tall tree that can grow anywhere from 100 to 200 feet high. And it has very smooth greenish black bark. And the needles are very soft, they're very flexible. They can be anywhere from 3 to 5 inches long. Blue-green in color and cluster in groups of 5. That's how I always remember this tree from other pines in our area, is the cluster of the needles, they're in clusters of 5. So when I'm on a nature hike and I'm teaching kids or anybody about the white pine, I will pluck a little cluster of needles off of it, and I'll show there are 5 needles to it, and how many letters are in the word white? 5. So that's how I kind of make the little connection for people to see what a white pine is. There have the 5 needles per cluster. The fruit of the tree is the cone, the pine cone. It is a rather large pine cone for our area. If you go out to California, these pine cones are tiny. But for our area, these are one of the larger pine cones of pine trees in our area. They can grow upwards of 8 inches in length, and they are 3 to 4 times longer than it is wide. So they are very long but narrow cones. The white pines prefer protection from hot, dry winds. They do best in slightly acidic, well-drained soils. They are mainly found in the northeastern U.S. They are found in our area here as well. They can be found as far west as Minnesota and as far south as Georgia. In our area, like I said, they're mainly found around the Mississippi River area. So we have a bunch on our campus here at the Watsky Center. There are a few at Westlake Park over in Davenport. And they're one of the very tall pine trees. You can collect the needles at any time. It is recommended to collect from the boughs that are on the ground. Don't just pluck them off the trees. In most cases, you probably won't be able to reach those needles because they are, like I said, a very tall tree, and those branches start higher up on the tree for the older trees. So it is best to collect them from the boughs that have already fallen from the tree. But you can collect them at any time. You can make this tea in this, or you can use the needles in the spring, in the fall, in the summer. But you can also use them in the winter, and they still have their full nutritious value in the winter, which is why I made this one a winter wild edible. With this plant, actually I'll go to the next slide first. The white pine needles are super, super high in vitamin C. As you can see the chart at the bottom of this page, you can see that oranges, which we all know are high in vitamin C, is actually not that high compared to white pine needles. The brand new needles even have more vitamin C than an orange. And you get into older needles, 1 year old or 2 year old, they have almost double the amount, if not almost triple the amount of vitamin C in those needles. So very nutritious, very high in the antioxidants. They have various amino acids in them. So a very, very healthy needle, a very, very healthy food. The needles can be used in most recipes that call for lemons. You can chop them up and use them as an herb in your salads, butters, dressings. You can also add the needles to potato salads, bean salads, pasta salads. And how I always use it, I always make a tea out of it. They are so good. I've had some people, this is a type of tea that you'll want to try it. I've heard it is a hit or miss. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm one that loves it. It kind of tastes like a lemon Christmas tea. So it has that piney taste to it, but it also has that citrusy taste to it. And with it being so high in vitamin C, there is a historical account that relates back to 1536 when the French explorer Jacques Cartier, his crew was on a ship for a long time traveling the oceans, and his entire ship crew came down with scurvy because they were vitamin C deficient. So as soon as they hit land, the Iroquois Indian, which is who they ran into first, saw that their whole ship crew was sick, and they offered them this pine needle tea, and it was so high in vitamin C it actually cured their entire crew. So this is a very, very healthy needle or healthy food for you. When you are preparing it, it is recommended you want to boil the water first. As soon as the water comes to a boil, you take it off the heat, and then you add the needles, and then you let it kind of simmer or stew in that already boiled water for about 20 minutes. If you boil the needles in with the water and you have them going at the same time, the boiling of the water can break down that vitamin C, and then it is not as nutritious for you. So make sure you boil the water first, then remove it from the heat, then add the needles. So here are some pictures. This is our pine ring that we have here at the Watsy Center. You can see how tall those trees. There's a little shorter tree right in the front of that picture that has some fencing around it. So that, and I think that tree, the shorter tree, has been planted already for, I want to say 10 years. And if I stand up next to it, I would say it's about 20 feet tall right there. So you can see just how tall they can get. And then the pine bough that I have on, they have a picture of, that is where you'd collect those needles from. So make sure the needles are still green when you collect them. Do not collect brown needles. All right, and our final wild edible for this presentation is the multiflora rose. Now, multiflora rose is an invasive species. It is not a native species. It has taken over some landscapes. This is one where I say collect 100% of the plant. Now you can't eat 100% of the plant, but you still want to destroy the plant. So with the multiflora rose, the edible parts are the hips, the flowers, the flower petals, and the young leaves. It is also known as Japanese rose. It is native to Asia. Like I said, it is invasive here, and it is invasive in Canada. So anywhere in North America is considered an invasive. It is typically found in rocky soil, woodland edges, and locations near lakes and rivers. Where I usually see it is on farmlands because it is a dense, thorny shrub. It is a rose, so there are thorns on it. So know this when you are going to collect the tips or the flowers or the leaves. There are thorns on this plant. Make sure you wear protective covering for that. But it is a shrub, a very dense shrub. So a lot of farmers would plant this around their property to keep their cattle in place because the cattle would not push their way through a thorny shrub. And so they'd use it as a livestock barrier. However, this plant has now spread everywhere, so it's not only on farmlands anymore, it is everywhere. The hips are best collected late fall or after the first frost and throughout the winter. The flowers will be collected obviously in the summer when they are blooming, and the leaves also can be collected in the summer. It is a shrub that can grow about 5 feet tall. Like I said, it is thorny. It is a thorny plant, just like all roses. This one does still have its thorns. The leaves are finely serrated, so they have that sawtooth edge to them. They are dark green and shiny. And the flowers are small. They have white petals on them, about 5 of them, and they are 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter. This plant is very fragrant. It smells amazing. Whenever it starts to bloom, even if I can't see the shrub, I know they are blooming because I can smell them, which is another reason why they were planted at one point, because they are a larger shrub and they give off a really fragrant, really good smelling flower. However, like I said, it is an invasive species. The rose hips and the leaves are very rich in vitamin C. They're also rich in carotene, and they are a good source of essential fatty acids. The flower petals, leaves, and hips can be eaten raw, and the hips can also make an excellent tea. Now, I do have that little asterisk why they can be eaten raw. So why I have that asterisk is because the hips themselves have, if you crack one open, there's little tiny seeds in them, that's fine, but there's these little hairs in those. And those hairs, the purpose of those hairs for the hip itself is to protect those seeds. So the purpose of the plant is to produce more plants with those little seeds. So they protect those seeds with these little hairs, which if you eat them can be very irritating. So you can eat them raw. It's not toxic to eat them, but you may get a little bit of irritation on your tongue when you are eating them raw. How I like to eat them is I make them into a tea. So I will put the hips in the water and I will give them a good mash with a spoon. And that kind of opens up those hips. And then they'll make this lovely tea. And then I will then strain them through like a coffee filter or cheesecloth when I'm getting the liquid back out to drink the liquid. So you're not actually going to be drinking those seeds or those little hairs. So here are some more close-up pictures of the multiflora rose. So I have the picture on the left is of our flowering shrub. You can see those flowers are very pretty and they do smell good. The picture in the middle is actually in the wintertime I took that picture. So it does hold on to its leaves throughout winter. It may start to drop towards the end of winter, but towards the beginning of winter, it will still hold on to its leaves. They are not that very pretty green color anymore. They're now turning brown because they are not an evergreen. But you can also see with that, you can see the serrated edges to those leaves. You can see the sharp edges on those leaves. And then finally, I have the hips. They are bright red in the winter. So they are actually easier to see in the winter because of that bright red color. It does stick out as you are walking through the woods. All right, so the resources I used during this presentation, I really enjoy the books by Samuel Thayer. He has 3 of them, Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and Incredible Wild Edibles. He is a forager up in Wisconsin, so he does stick with a lot of the Midwest plants. The nice thing about his book is he has 3 books. Each book only covers maybe 30 plants, so there's not a lot of plants in the books, but each book is over, I want to say over 200, 300 pages long. And it is because he has about 10 pages per plant in each book. So he covers in great detail each plant that he covers. If you want kind of a tell-all book and you just want one book that covers all the wild edibles in one area, Midwest Foraging by Lisa M. Rose is a really good book. She has 115 plants in one book. With that being said, it is actually has fewer pages than any of Samuel Thayer's books. So she only has 1 to 2 pages per plant. So she doesn't go in great detail of the plants, but she still covers what is actually edible here in the Midwest. And then like I showed you earlier in the presentation, The Scout's Guide to Wild Edibles by Mike Kriebel. He was an Iowa naturalist. He's a retired Iowa naturalist. So his plants are right here in Iowa. And it is a Scout's Guide book. So if you have a Scout in your family and you want to give them some fun activities to do, he actually not only has recipes in this book and goes into detail on some of the plants, but he also has activities of how to get kids involved with helping you forage. The websites I use is wildedible.com/foraging, ediblewildfood.com, eattheplanet.org, and suburbanforagers.com. So we do have one wild edible plant or class coming up It is focusing only on the sugar maple. So maple syruping. We have usually 2 dates, which we do this year, but the 13th, March 13th class is full now. But we still have openings in the March 6th class. This will be an in-person class here at the Wapsie Center on March 6th at 10 a.m. The class will be outdoors, so you will be dressing accordingly, but we will, it's Mike will be leading that class. He's one of our naturalists here. He will be showing you how to tap a tree and then how to process the syrup from the tree. So if you are interested in this class, please call us to register. As like you can see, registration is filling up. It is already full for one class, and the other class we still have some openings. So call our number here at 563-328-3286 to register for that class if you are interested. And finally, here is my contact information. I will be taking questions soon if you guys have any. If you can't come up with any now, but all of a sudden one pops in your head later today, I have my email address on there. I also have our phone number on there. And then we have our WAPSI website on there through scottcountyiowa.gov. And we do have a Facebook page, which is where we advertise most of our events. And that's through Scott County Iowa Conservation. So I hope you all enjoyed this presentation on winter wild edibles here in Iowa and in Illinois. Are there any questions?
I have a question actually. So you mentioned stinging nettle and that being edible. I've encountered stinging nettle. How do you go about consuming that?
You want to boil it. You want to cook it. So when you boil it, it kind of boils away the properties that cause that stinging sensation. And so it's kind of like boiling spinach. You'd boil stinging nettle, same recipe, but that would boil away the properties that give that stinging sensation to you.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I don't know if you have anything else, Celeste, to say.
No, I would just like to thank you for being here today and teaching us about this. It was super cool. And yeah, if there's no other questions, I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, was there any in the chat box? I haven't looked actually in the chat
box. I don't see anything in the chat box here.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. I'm sure we can set up some more programs if you guys are interested, and we'll figure some stuff out for Fort Byron. Yes. Okay, we do have some interest in that. All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Goodbye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.